Hello, and welcome to the Essential Reads. My name is Isaac, and my goal is to bring to you a bunch of classic audiobooks in an easy and accessible way. We're continuing with Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, and as usual for this book, trigger warning. The past was the worst, and in the past they used language which should have never been acceptable, but it was back then, and it most definitely is not now. So, because this book is full of language that should not be used, I'm going to be ducking the audio, like just dropping the thing to essentially bleep it. But if you find any sort of character descriptions, or if you just find that sort of way of, writing or whatever offensive, maybe listen to another book. But I'm going to try my best to honor what is written in the book without changing anything, apart from just ducking the audio so that I can get paid here on YouTube. Or podcast, when I upload this to podcast. I need to get better at introductions. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm terrible at my job. Let's get started. Support the show. Do the things. Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 25. The news was all over in the town in 2 minutes, and you could see people tearing down on the run from every which way, and some of them putting on their coats as they come. Pretty soon we were in the middle of a crowd, and the noise of the tramping was like a soldier's march. The windows and dooryards was full, and every minute somebody would say over a fence, "Is it them?" And somebody trotting along with the gang would answer back and say, "You bet it is." When we got to the house, the street in front of it was packed, and 3 girls was standing in the door. Mary Jane was red-headed, but that don't make no difference. She was most awful beautiful, and her face and eyes was all lit up like glory. She was so glad her uncles was come. The king, he spread his arms, and Mary Jane, she jumped for him, and the harelip jumped for the duke. And there they had it. Everybody most, leastways women, cried for joy to see him and meet him again, at last, and have such good times. Then the king, he hunched the duke, private. I see him do it, and he looked around and see the coffin, over in the corner on 2 chairs. So then, him and the duke, with hand across each other's shoulders and t'other hand to their eyes, walked slow and solemn over there. Everybody dropping back to give 'em room, and all the talk and noise stopping. People saying, "Shh!" and all the men taking off their hats and drooping their heads, so you could hear a pin fall. And when they got there, they bent over and looked in the coffin and took one side. And then they burst out a crying so you could hear 'em to Orleans most. And then they put their arms round each other's necks and hung their chins over each other's shoulders. And then, for 3 minutes, or maybe 4, I never seen 2 men leak the way they done. And mind you, everybody was doing the same. The place was so damp I never seen anything like it. Then one of them got on one side of the coffin, and t'other on t'other side, and they kneeled down and rested their foreheads on the coffin and let on to pray all theirselves. Well, when it come to that, it worked the crowd like you never see anything like it, and so everybody broke down and went to sobbing right out loud. The poor girls, too, and every woman nearly went up to the girls, without saying a word, and kissed 'em, solemn on the forehead, and then put their hand on their heads, and looked up towards the sky, with tears running down, and then bursted down and went off, sobbing and swabbing, and give the next woman a show. I never seen anything so disgusting. Well, by and by, the king, he gets up and comes forward a little and works himself up and slobbers out a speech, all full of tears and flapdoodle about being sore trial for him and his poor brother to lose the deceased, and to miss seeing the deceased alive after a long journey of 4,000 mile. But it's a trial that's sweetened and sanctified to us by this dear sympathy and these holy tears. And so he thanks them out of his heart, out of his brother's heart, 'cause out of their mouths they can't, words being too weak and cold, and all that kind of rotten slush, till it was just sickening. And then he blubbers out a pious goody-goody amen, and turns himself loose, and goes to crying fit to burst. And the minute the words was out of his mouth, somebody over in the crowd struck up the doxajoller, and everybody joined in with all their might, and it just warmed you up, and made you feel as good as church letting out. Music is a good thing, and after all that soul butter and hogwash, I never see it freshen up things so, and sound so honest and bully. Then the king begins to work up his jaw again, and says how him and his nieces would be glad if a few of the main principal friends of the family would take supper here with him this evening, and help us set up with the ashes of the deceased. And says if his poor brother, laying yonder, could speak, he knows who he would name, for they was names that was very dear to him, and mentioned often in his letters, and so he will name the same, to wit, as follows, viz., Reverend Mr. Hobson, and Deacon Lot Hovey, and Ben Rucker, and Abner Shackelford, and Levy Bell, and Dr. Robinson, and their wives, and the widow, Bartley. Reverend Hobson and Dr. Robinson was down the other end of town, hunting together. And that is, the doctor was shipping sick men to the other world, and the preacher was pinting him right. Lawyer Bell was away up to Louisville on some business, but the rest was on hand. So they all come and shook hands with the king, and thanked him, and talked to him. And then they shook hands with the Duke, and didn't say nothing, but just kept a-smiling and bobbing their heads, like a passel of sapheads, whilst he made all sorts of signs with his hands, and said, "Goo, goo, 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 goo," all the time, like a baby that can't talk. So the king, he blattered along, and managed to inquire about pretty much everybody and dog in town, by his name, and mentioned all sorts of little things that happened one time or another in the town, or to George's family, or Peter's, and he always let on that Peter wrote him things. That was a lie. He got every blessed one of them out of that young flathead that we canoed up to the steamboat. Then Mary Jane, she fetched up the letter her father left behind, and the king read it out loud, and cried over it. It give the dwelling house and $3,000 gold to the girls, and it give the tan yard, which was doing good business, along with other houses and land worth about $7,000, and $3,000 in gold to Harvey and William, and told where the $6,000 cash was hid down in the cellar. So these two frauds, they said they'd go and fetch it up, and have everything square and above board, and told me to come with a candle. We shut the door behind us, and when they found the bag, they split it open on the floor, and it was a lovely sight, all them yellow boys. My, the way the king's eyes did shine. He slaps the Duke on the shoulder and says, "Oh, this ain't bully nor nothing. Oh, no, I reckon not. Why, Billy, it beats none such, don't it?" The Duke allowed it did. They pawed the yellow boys, and sifted them through their fingers, and let them jingle down on the floor. And the king says, "It ain't no use talking. Being brothers to a rich dead man, and representatives of foreign heirs that's got left, is the line for you and me, Bilge. This year comes of trusting to Providence. It's the best way in the long run. I tried 'em all, and there ain't no better way." Most everybody would have been satisfied with that pile, and took it on trust. But no, they must count it. So they counts it, and it comes out to $415 short. Says the king, "Darn him, I wonder what he done with that $415. They worried over that for a while, and ransacked it all around, when the Duke says, "Well, he was a pretty sick man, and likely just made a mistake. I reckon that's the way of it. Best way is to let it go, and keep still about it. We can spare it." "Oh, shucks, yes, we can spare it. I care nothing about that. It's the counting I'm thinking about. We want to be awful square and open and above board here, you know. We want to lug this here money upstairs and count it before everybody. Then there ain't nothing suspicious. But when a dead man says there's $6,000, you know, we don't want to..." "Hold on," says the Duke. "Let's make up the deficit." And he begun to haul out yellow boys out of his pocket. "It's a most amazing good idea, Duke. You have got rattling clever head on you," says the king. "Blessed if old Nonsuch ain't a helping us out again." And he begun to haul out yellow jackets and stack 'em up. It most busted them, but they made up the 6,000 clean and clear. "Say," says the Duke, "I got another idea. Let's go upstairs and take this money, and then take and give it to the girls." "Good land, Duke. Let me hug you. It's the most dazzling idea I ever struck a man. You have certainly got the most astonishing head I ever see. Oh, this is the boss dodge. Ain't no mistake about it. Let 'em fetch along with their suspicions now, if they want to. This'll lay 'em out. When we got upstairs, everybody gathered around the table, and the king counted and stacked it up, $300 in a pile. 20 elegant little piles. Everybody looked hungry at it and licked their chops. Then they racked it in the bag again, and I see the king begin to swell himself up for another speech. He says, "Friends, friends all, my poor brother that lays yonder has done generous by them that's left behind the vial of sorrows. He has done generous by these poor little lambs that he loved and sheltered, and that's left fatherless and motherless. Yes, and we that knowed him knows that he would have done more generous by 'em if he hadn't been afeard of wounding his dear William and me. Now, wouldn't he? There ain't no question about it in my mind. Well then, what kind of brothers would it be that stand in his way at such a time? And what kind of uncles would it be that rob such poor sweet lambs as these that he loved so at such a time? If I know William, and I think I do, well, I'll just ask him." He turns around and begins to make a lot of signs with the Duke with his hands, and the Duke looks at him stupid and leather-headed a while. Then, all of a sudden, he seems to catch his meaning, and jumps for the king, going with all his might for joy, and hugs him about 15 times before he lets up. Then the king says, "I knowed it. I reckon that I'll convince anybody the way he feels about it. Here, Mary Jane, Susan, Joanna, take the money. Take it all. It's the gift of him that lays yonder, cold but joyful." Mary Jane, she went for him. Susan and the harelip went for the Duke. And then such another, hugging and kissing I never see yet. And everybody crowded up with tears in their eyes, and most shook the hands of them frauds, saying all the time, "You dear good souls, how lovely, how could you?" Well then, pretty soon all the hands got talking about the deceased again, and how good he was, and what a loss he was, and all that. And before long, a big, iron-jawed man worked himself in there from outside, and stood a-listening and looking, and not saying anything, and nobody saying anything to him either, because the king was talking, and they was all busy a-listening. The king was saying, in the middle of something he started in on, "They're being particular friends of the deceased. That's why they're invited here this evening. But tomorrow we want all to come. Everybody. For he respected everybody. He liked everybody. And so it's fitting that his funeral orgies should be public." And so he went a-mooning on and on, liking to hear himself talk. And every little while he fetched in his funeral orgies again, till the Duke he couldn't stand it no more. So he writes on a little scrap of paper, "Oh, biscuits, you old fool," and folds it up and goes a-going and reaching over people's heads to him. The king, he reads it and puts it in his pocket and says, "Poor William, afflicted as he is, his heart's all is right. Asks me to invite everybody to come to the funeral. Wants me to make 'em all welcome, but he needn't a worried. It's just what I was at." Then he weaves along again, perfectly calm, and goes to dropping in his funeral orgies again every now and then, just like he done before. And when he done it the third time, he says, "I say orgies, not because it's the common term, because it ain't, obiscaries being the common term, but because orgies is the right term. Obiscaries ain't used in England no more now, it's gone out. We say orgies now in England. Orgies is better, because it means the thing you're after, more exact. It's a word made up out of the Greek, orgo, outside, open, broad, and the Hebrew, jesem, to plant, cover up, hence inter. So you see, funeral orgies is an opener public funeral." He was the worst I e'er struck. Well, the iron-jawed man, he laughed right in his face. Everybody was shocked. Everybody says, "Why, doctor?" And Abner Shackelford says, "Why, Robinson, ain't you heard the news? This is Harvey Wilkes." The king, he smiled, eager, and shoved out his flapper, and says, "Is it my poor brother's dear good friend and physician?"
"Keep your hands off of me,"
says the doctor.
"You talk like an Englishman, don't you? It's the worst imitation I ever heard. You, Peter Wilkes's brother, you're a fraud, that's what you are."
Well, how they all took on. They crowded round the doctor and tried to quiet him down and tried to explain to him and tell him how Harvey showed in 40 ways that he was Harvey and knowed everybody by name and the names of the very dogs and begged him not to hurt Harvey's feelings and the poor girls' feelings and all that. But it weren't no use. He stormed right along and said any man that pretended to be an Englishman and couldn't imitate the lingo no better than what he did was a fraud and a liar. The poor girls was hanging to the king and crying, and all of a sudden the doctor ups and turns on him. He says, "I was your father's friend. I'm your friend. I warned you as a friend and an honest one that wants to protect you and keep you out of harm and trouble. Turn your backs on that scoundrel and have nothing to do with him. Ignorant tramp with his idiotic Greek and Hebrew as he calls it. He is the thinnest kind of imposter. Has come here with a lot of empty names and facts that he has picked up somewhere and you take them for proofs. And are helped to fool yourselves by these foolish friends here who ought to know better. Mary Jane Wilkes, you know me for your friend, and for your unselfish friend too. Now, listen to me. Turn this pitiful rascal out. I beg you to do it. Will you?" Mary Jane straightened herself up, and my, but she was handsome. She says, "Here is my answer." She hove the bag of money and put it in the king's hands and says, "Take this $6,000 and invest it for me and my sisters any way you want to, and don't give us no receipt for it." Then she put her arm around the king on one side, and Susan and the Harelip done the same on the other. Everybody clapped their hands and stomped the floor like a perfect storm, while the king held up his head and smiled, proud. The doctor says, "All right, I wash my hands of the matter, and I warn you all that a time's coming when you're going to feel sick whenever you think of this day." And away he went. "All right, doctor," says the king, kind of mocking him. "We'll try and get 'em to send for you." Which made 'em all laugh, and they said it was a prime good hit. Thank you so very much for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, share, all that jazz, and if you really enjoyed, do subscribe because there's more to come. And if you're listening on podcast, please leave a review. It is the easiest way to get this in front of as many people as possible, and it really makes my day reading your reviews. So please do that. If you want to support the show in a more concrete way, you can join the channel here. Which would be nice. It's just getting worse and worse and worse with the Duke and the King, whatever he wants to call himself. Dear. Things are not going to improve. We're on 26. I think I've got another 20 chapters. I think it's 46 chapters. I'm very concerned. I just don't have a good feeling about how this book is going to finish. Let's find out together very soon. The next chapter will be out in a couple of days. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, bye-bye.